So when you think of peace, what do you think of? Can you think of a moment, a spot in time, a place in time where you felt that deep sense of peace? That sense that just for a moment, everything is right in the world. I like this quote a few days ago from PJ Fleck. There's a euphoria and a pause in time that makes everything literally stop. Minnesota coach PJ Fleck said by phone on Tuesday night, reflecting on the post-game scene. That was after they beat Penn State. There's nothing wrong in the world at that moment. It takes over your whole being. Have you experienced peace like that? Peace that comes from a working together of everything working the way that it's supposed to and the desired outcome happening. When I think of peace being from the Midwest, I can't help think about that fresh fallen snow. When the entire world looks beautiful and perfect. And I remember going out and running in that snow, and literally sound seems to just evaporate and disappear into a still quietness. When I think of peace, that's what I think of a covering over of everything that's wrong, over all the brown and dead and ugly grass is suddenly beautiful and white. Of course, that peace quickly gets ruined when all the cars drive on it the next day and everything gets dirty and brown and ugly once again. Isn't that sometimes what peace is like in our lives? We have this incredible experience of peace, this moment in time that is just perfect. And then all of a sudden that peace evaporates. For me, I experienced that at Bowden's birth. There was this moment in time when everything was just perfect. We prayed for a healthy and whole child. I did the finger and toe test. He passed. Everything was good and he wasn't fussing. He was just kind of taking in the entire world and everything was wonderful for a moment. Until all of a sudden I said, wait a second. They're finishing up with Lindsay. How come she's not here yet? And the peace was gone. Suddenly I was worried about my wife. Suddenly I was worried about what was happening in the operating room after the C-section. Suddenly there was this perfect moment, but I felt the need to be somewhere else. So how do we experience peace in our lives? See, peace connotates a sense of contentment more than that. A sense of fulfillment, a sense that in that exact moment, we are basking in God's pleasure. And what I found is that sense of peace, that powerful peace can come upon us even amid struggle, even in the midst of hardships, even in the middle of disruption. That was one of the things I experienced in the hospital. We had to go back into the hospital because my wife had preeclampsia and was not feeling well and had headaches and migraines. And yet, in the hospital, as we were relating and connecting to the people that God was placing in our lives, we found connection and relationship. One of the nurses even shared what was going on in their life. And we sensed that even in that moment, even that difficult, hard moment, that somehow God had put us there for a purpose and a reason. And we connected with staff and we prayed with nurses for what they had going on in their lives. And somehow we sensed that God had put us back there on the third floor over at Kaiser for a purpose. But how do we get there? How do we find that sense of peace? So I had this mug. It was one of my favorite mugs. And inextricably, it ended up in pieces when I dropped it. Peace, it does not mean to be in a place where there's no noise, trouble, or hard work. It means to be in the midst of those things and be calm in your heart. And the reality is there are really two ways of getting there. And one's really not a way because one doesn't work. One is the world's way of getting there. And as we looked back a few weeks ago in Prodigal God, we learned that everybody believes there's basically two ways to find happiness, two ways to find contentment, two ways to find fulfillment. Either by keeping all the rules and doing everything perfectly and having everything in good order and having everything right, or as Joseph Campbell would put it, following your bliss. Do whatever you want, and if you do that perfectly, then you're going to have peace, then you're going to have contentment, and then everything's going to be wonderful. And so we have these two ways of doing life in the world. So how is that going to work for the world when you got two groups of people trying to find peace in two entirely different ways? It's going to be a big, giant mess. The other way that the world sometimes tries to do it is just ignore it, right? If there's a conflict there, but if we ignore it long enough, if we sweep it under the rug, everybody's going to forget that it's there. Maybe you experienced this at Thanksgiving. Remember, don't bring up politics. You know your uncle's a trunk nut, and your aunt, she loves Elizabeth Warren, and so if you talk politics, we're going to have World War III over the turkey, so don't go there, right? And everybody has someone in the family. As I like to refer to it, you know, the Christmas story, an Uncle Eddie. Maybe you're sitting there going, my family, we don't have an Uncle Eddie. If you're saying that right now, then maybe you're it. And so how do you find peace with that? See, peace doesn't come from us. In spite of what someone wrote in the New York Times in an ad years ago. He said that the meaning of Christmas is that love will triumph and that we will be able to put together a world of unity and peace. We've got half the population trying to ignore that there's anything wrong. Another group of the population saying, you guys are breaking all the rules, you got to do it right. And another part of the population saying, you just got to do what you want to do and everything's going to work out all right. Are we going to be able to get to peace in the midst of all that? See, what this person was saying is that we have the light, we have the power inside us, and if we just try hard enough, we can have peace. But we can't, can we? Science has tried, different political systems have tried, everyone has tried to bring peace, and it doesn't seem to work, at least not from the inside, not from the side of our world. And God talks about how the cosmos was made. It talks about our God creating a cosmos out of a chaos, of creating a tapestry out of a tangle. It literally talks about our God taking and weaving together the forces of nature into a garment which he wears. Something beautiful and whole, something that was meant to work together in perfect harmony with everything interwoven and interrelated and interdependent. But that fabric was torn. That fabric was torn and our relationships fissured, our relationships broke, and that piece, that garment that was woven together that was meant to work perfectly, so that our lives work perfectly together, so that our lives with creation and our Creator all work together perfectly, was ripped and torn. And so just as a way of reviewing and trying to remember and trying to figure out where this problem is, what are the 4 broken relationships that each and every one of us have to deal with? See, when we fell, when sin entered the world, there was a tear that happened, and that tear ripped through our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, and our relationship with creation. And then ultimately, and this is the source of the real problem that prevents us from being able to fix any of this on our own, and that is our relationship with ourselves. Because what happened? What happened? God said, don't do this and live in this world in this way that I created, and you'll live in perfect harmony with one another. And then when everything goes wrong, God comes to Adam and says, hey, what did you do? What does he say? This woman that you gave me, she's the problem. And of course, right after they fell, they were afraid. They were ashamed. They no longer saw themselves the way they were supposed to. Their relationship with God was torn. Their relationship with one another was torn. And then their relationship with creation was torn because God says, because you have done this, the ground will produce thorns and thistles. So those are the four relationships that are broken. The relationship with God, the relationship with one another, the relationship with creation, and the relationship with ourselves. Essentially, when we lost our relationship with God, the whole world stopped working right. The fabric was torn. The fabric was torn, and we cannot reweave the fabric. We cannot recreate things and make them whole again. And so something was necessary. In Luke chapter 1, we hear about who was prophesied. His father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit, and he prophesied. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he has said through his holy prophets long ago. Salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, my child, this is speaking about John the Baptist, will be called the prophet of the Most High. For you will go before the Lord, that is Jesus, and prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, that is Jesus, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, and guide our feet into a path of peace. In other words, Jesus coming is the light shining on our lives, casting out the darkness that's in ourselves, casting out that identity that is broken between our God, restoring, reweaving that fabric between us as God's people and our God himself. And that also restores our identity, who we are, because we have a new identity in Jesus. And so there we have a relationship restored both with ourselves and with our God. So the question is then how? How do we reweave our relationship with one another and with creation? In Colossians chapter 3, Paul admonishes them and us with these words. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace. In other words, you were made right in relationship with God and with one another through the message of Christ. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to the God the Father through him. In other words, peace comes from the message of Christ. Peace comes to us from knowing that God has restored his relationship with us in Jesus. And what that means is that no matter what is going on in your life, no matter what is happening, good or bad, it cannot be because God doesn't love you. And so whatever is going on in your life, you have the guarantee in Jesus Christ that God is for you. And so then you can trust that no matter what is happening, God is working it for your good. And then Paul says that that message is to dwell in us. That's the same word that is used when it says that the Word made flesh came and dwelt among us. It means that that message is supposed to live in us, that message of peace, and that we are called to be part of God's work of reweaving the tapestry, turning the tangle that our world has become back whole again, to turn it back to what it was supposed to be. And so we do that by forgiving one another, by walking with one another, by caring for one another. Because the thing is if we keep all our money and our time and our power to and for ourselves, we might literally be on top of each other, but we are not woven together socially, relationally, financially, or emotionally. What reweaving peace means, it's to sacrificially thread and lace and press our time, our resources, our good, and our power into the lives of others. That's why we at St. Matthew's talk about sharing life. We share life because it is a gift from God. It's something we receive, something that we don't have on our own. And that life takes place in relationship with one another. And so this peace comes into our lives and in the lives of our community as we live in relationship with one another around God and His Word. We inspire hope. We inspire hope because we present a picture of a different world. A world the way it was meant to be. A world with our lives knit together in Jesus. So what does that look like? I read a story about Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard is a beautiful place, an isolated place, but historically, all of the people that lived on Martha's Vineyard came from an area in England, Kent, England, specifically an area called the Wells. And because of its isolation and because of the heredity, everybody coming from the same place, there was a lot of intermarriage. And so hereditary deafness was a norm on the island. In Chilmark, 1 out of every 25 people was deaf. And in another village, it was 1 out of every 4 that could not hear. Talk about an area that was torn apart by sin, an area that was broken. And what happens with people that are disabled? Often in our lives, they're pushed to the edge of society, forced to adapt their lives to the lives of everyone else who is well. But Nora Ellen Gross, in her book, Everyone Spoke Sign Language Here, tells the tale of how everyone on Martha's Vineyard learned how to sign. So much so that they didn't think of people who were deaf as being disabled. When someone asked, they said, oh, we all spoke sign language. They weren't disabled, they were just deaf. And it was such a thing that in that society where people were an event where there were more people who couldn't hear than could, everyone would just speak sign language out of courtesy towards those who couldn't hear. The people that were deaf weren't forced to learn to read lips. Instead, everyone signed. So that everyone in that community felt like they belonged, felt like they were important. And what that community found is that community became stronger and woven together even greater. And the society as a whole benefited because now when people were separated by distance, they didn't have to shout. People could sign over long distances and communicate with a spyglass. Back before telephones existed, you could communicate over long distance with sign language. And the whole community was woven together and became better. Because the strong sacrificially pressed their lives into caring for the weak. That's what Jesus did, isn't it? God with cosmic power makes himself weak for us. Humbles himself, walks with us, experiences everything that we experience in order to lift us up. He doesn't expect us to become like him. Rather, he becomes like us. The strong for the weak. When somebody's hurting, someone's suffering, you can't say, hey, pull yourself together. Rather, we who are strong in the grace of Jesus and in life are called to link arms with those who are struggling and mend back together the fabric. So how do we find the strength to do that? Jesus said just before he was betrayed, in John chapter 14, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. This peace is first and foremost a gift from God. It isn't something you can seek. It isn't something you can try to grasp, but only receive. And the way that we as people receive that gift is by releasing our hold. Releasing our hold on those things that we would try and hang on to find peace. And then we find ourselves with open hands and discover that we can receive this gift of peace. That peace comes from God, comes through Jesus, comes from the grace that we have in him. Amen.